All right, welcome everyone to our panel discussion today, titled Reimagining the Academy, AI, Liberal Education, and the Future of Higher Learning. Our conversation today, this particular panel, will be examining the transformative impact of artificial intelligence on higher education within the context of liberal values. As AI technologies reshape teaching methodologies, research capabilities, and institutional operations, we'll explore how colleges and universities can integrate these tools while preserving the core tenets of liberal education: critical thinking, intellectual pluralism, and the pursuit of knowledge as a public good. Distinguished panelists will address pressing questions about academic integrity in the era of generative AI, the ethics of algorithmic decision making in admissions and assessment, and how technological innovation might either exacerbate or ameliorate existing inequalities in higher education access. This discussion aims to articulate a vision for AI adoption that enhances rather than diminishes the humanistic foundations of higher learning, balancing technological efficiency with the enduring values of open inquiry and democratic education. Hopefully, our discussion will be a lot more lively than me reading that abstract. I'm joined here by Joe Nalvin, Aaron Valdez, and Mike Bowen. I'll let each of our panelists introduce themselves, with Joe paving the way for us.
Sure. I've been trained as a cultural anthropologist, and so think of AI as being another culture that I'm trying to figure out. Also, I've been an attorney, a litigator as well, so I have to confess to being persnickety as well when I give my replies. I'm retired, but active writing on the subject. I became infected by AI image generation and later LLMs about 2 years ago, and I've caught the bug, and I love it. So I'll leave it at that.
Sounds good. We look forward to hearing from you and your sharp responses. Aaron, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm Erin Valdez, and I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Education and Public Service Incubator at the University of Austin, which is a new university here in Austin, Texas. My background is in teaching and educational philanthropy and educational policy. And so I do think about these things a lot. And of course, we're thinking about them a lot at the university.
Awesome. Pleasure to have you here. Mike, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Michael David Cobb Bowen. I've been a writer online since 2003, or maybe even before that. I'm one of those computer science guys that started programming back when Star Wars was new. And I've learned in and outside of the academy in computer science. And basically everything they taught me in 1982 doesn't count anymore. So I know something a little bit about continuing education and how computer mediated communications changes the way we interact with each other.
Wow. Well, I'm relieved to have been born in 1983. So hopefully everything still counts for us here. So I'll get started with the first question. Joe will begin answering that, and then we'll go to Aaron and Mike. If AI can now write essays, solve problems, and even engage in Socratic dialogue, what uniquely human elements of liberal education becomes more valuable rather than less, and what should we double down on teaching?
Uh, First, I find as you might think that the question is kind of problematic. We're coming at it from presumptively a liberal perspective. But I'll give you a short anecdote. When I was going to law school, the dean of the law school asked me, "Joe, do you see yourself becoming more conservative over time?" I really didn't know how to answer that question. And I have that same feeling here, is that if it's a liberal perspective, what is the bias that's built into this machine that we expect to have responses that correspond to that? So I prefer to, and I know it's embedded in the question about human concepts, but there are a lot of biases built into these algorithms or these LLMs that require us to start with the premise that we're going to have an aggressive engagement with them. And if we're not, then we're falling down and we're just simply accepting kind of canned responses. Now, I realize that it's drawing on tremendous amounts of data for the most part. Occasionally it gets stuck, and I could speak to that as well. And if it leads with an answer, it generally leads with something that's nice, that's liberal, that's woke, that's that framework. And you have to push it to get a more robust response. Now, there may be, and I'm sure there are LLMs, perhaps in other countries, that start with other kinds of responses as part of their bias system. So I think once you have a fair discussion on that, then you can say, well, what do we expect these LLMs to do in education, because it's problematic to begin with. I'll stop there at this point.
Well, if you wouldn't mind elaborating a little bit, what LLMs are we specifically referencing? Is it Claude, which I know has a tendency to be the most woke out of all of them?
No, I generally use Gemini. I've used ChatGPT, and also Freedom GPT has one of those expert models things where it gives you 6 or 7 different collation of different responses. I think if we think, and here this is on a visual mode, but I would think the same thing happens in terms of hallucinations on the LLM side. If you recall, in The Guardian, they featured an image of 1943 German soldiers that Google's Gemini had created. And it had Black German soldier from 1943, Asian German soldier, female German soldiers, and it was just historically ridiculous. But there it was. So the question is, well, why didn't its algorithm have an historical accuracy as priority over diversity? So right away we could see that kind of prioritization of the reply. Now you can fix these in a kind of whack-a-mole approach. Here's a problem, here's a problem. But I don't really know the architecture, and I treat it as a black box that it gives me responses, in which case I see it as I have to be a Socrates with this expert, and I'm always making this expert smarter because I know more than it does. So at least that's the attitude I have. And so it's this kind of relationship, a quote unquote relationship, because it's really mathing and giving me probabilistic responses. So I understand the reality of this kind of conversation that's happening. And yet, if we're going to introduce this into education, especially at the university level, because I think K through 12 is a different story, do all the students know as much as I know in order to be able to catch those hallucinations or those problems, or they simply accept what is given to them?
Yeah. Erin, do you want to chime in on your thoughts with the university education?
Yeah, I'd love to chime in, and thank you. That was really well set up, Joe. What I work on here at the University of Austin is I'm actually working to build a center that will equip future educators and leaders in education entrepreneurship. So I actually think a lot about K-12. So if you don't mind me just kind of chiming off of that and then bringing it into the higher ed context. I think what you hit on there was exactly right. So, and this goes back to cognitive science. We actually can't learn anything or even be critical thinkers without basic knowledge of the world. We need architecture in our brains to be critical thinkers. We need it for analogical reasoning and for all the reasons that we would need, Joe, to be in your position to look at that picture that Gemini generated and ask questions about it and to challenge it, right? So I do think there's a really important role that K-12 needs to play, and that we have to assume that it will play in order for our students to even be able to engage in these higher level conversations that you and I hope that they will in a higher learning capacity. We hope that they'll be able to engage in Socratic dialogue and to be able to respond to questions and be challenged in the moment and come up with responses that aren't AI generated necessarily. So I think actually we do have to sort of, there is a role here for saying, hey, look, like, if we can't assume our students are coming in without any fundamental or foundational knowledge, I don't know what higher education's for at all at that point. I mean, we might as well just give up the game, because you can't teach them everything they need to know that they were supposed to have known in the 12 years that they had before they got to you. And if they can't even critically assess or challenge the answers they're getting from any of the LLMs, I think we've got a real problem on our hands. So I guess I don't mean to be pessimistic. I'm actually kind of open to using AI in a lot of different tools and capacities, but I do think that without that ability, you really are at the mercy of whatever the bias of the LLM is.
Interesting. One of the counter arguments there could be that, it is because of higher education, it is because of cutting edge technology that was birthed in higher education that AI is where it is. And to choose to not use it, in some professors and some universities have leaned into that, like, how do we restrict use of AI when universities and places of education should be as cutting edge as possible? Some would say it seems like there's just a little bit of a conflict there, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think the tension is there's kind of two ways to think about it. On the one hand, learning how to use AI or being equipped to build LLMs, which actually is something I hope more people get into, the architecture side of it, the computer science side of it, that is a very appropriate thing to study and pursue in higher ed. So no question there. What I'm more leaning into is actually the word that Joe pinged on in the first question, which was liberal education. So I took that to mean liberal arts education, not liberal in a political sense. And in a liberal arts setting, you actually should be leaning in on the critical thinking capacities that you probably shouldn't be outsourcing to an LLM, right? So there's like this cognitive offloading piece, which I would take to be making the chatbot do your homework for you, which is actually the opposite of what you should be challenging yourself to do in college. And the more challenging thing, which is the computer science, the engineering, the kind of technical skills that you would hope to gain and learn in higher education. So I kind of take those to be two separate things.
Yeah. No, Mike.
When I think about this, I still remember when the RSA Animate did these whiteboard chalks, and a guy named Ken Thompson talked about K through 12 education and how this was structured on the Industrial Revolution. You go by bells, you sit in ranks and files, and you're trying to get the right answer out of students. And I think we've talked about that back in the 80s, the closing of the American mind, and how we were changing the way that we teach so that we think more about process than getting the right answer. And we've kind of done something strange. Is we've relied more on standardized tests than essays, and we have kids nowadays, like my kids did, 3 hours of homework every night, and they were just overloaded and overburdened, and they have to be in the AP classes and they have to get everything right. And they're not having any joy in learning. They're not engaged in the spirit of their school. And I think, especially in K-12, in public school, you don't engage the character of the student. It's just like, you have to get this grade to get into this university, or else you're going to be universal basic income or welfare. And we don't judge character anymore. And we don't encourage kids to say, this is the spirit of our school. We are a school, this is our mascot, and this mascot has these qualities, and you can be valuable as a person. And now we kind of have gotten into a populist realm, which is whatever's the most popular thing wins, regardless of character. And then we don't expect character, and we expect scandal. And nobody's getting graded on character. So it's just like we are abandoning the person in the very beginning. So that redefines what they use this tool for. I have to use this tool to get all the right answers because that's what matters the most. That's the only thing I'm being evaluated on. And yet we know at the same time that kids spend time online outside of school, and that's why we have influencers. So these influencers talk to the kids more than the professors do. So this kind of goes back to, are we going to take this opportunity to restructure the way we think about education? Or are we just going to keep throwing money at the same formulas and know that we can use the information superhighway in ways that we haven't yet? And that's why students can cheat, because there are answers outside of school that are still valuable. And they're not bringing their full attention to school because school is not engaging them on that personal level that live TikToks or anything are speaking to the students directly. So that's the context in which I think about this, because there's so many things you can learn outside of school, and GPT has access to all that whole world.
It seems that education is becoming even more about just input and output, and there's a right answer and a wrong answer. And it's not as much about showing your work, it's just about getting to that right answer. And one of the eerie things that I think about, Michael, is that this almost feels like mechanizing the human. Turning the human, it's a naturally curious, more qualitative than quantitative being, into a being that grows into their teens, into their 20s, into their 40s, into their 60s and 70s, to think of the world in binary, whether that's code or binary fashion. And I wonder what you might say about sort of like what that says about the future of humanity if we continue down this path, Michael.
Oh, that was for Joe or me?
For you, Michael.
Oh, sure. I saw a very good use of AI technology, which was very specific, which was the kids came to school and said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they were able to generate images of that kid as a recognizable adult in the uniform that they would be taking. So if you were a singer, they put you on the stage with a microphone, you wanted to be an astronaut, and all the kids applauded. They were so happy to see themselves and visualize themselves as the person that they wanted to be. So there are ways that you can engage students and make their classes fun. We all remember our fun teachers. We all remember the teachers that actually inspired us despite all the rest of them. And we remember our bad teachers too. And we have to have that continuity of the engagement of the teacher with each individual student and knowing them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Aaron, you mentioned critical thinking, and the question I have for you is, should universities embrace a radical transparency approach where students can use AI freely, but must document their use, or does that fundamentally alter what we're assessing? And where do we draw the line between collaboration and what's been going on recently, which is the outsourcing of critical thinking?
Well, this is being tried. I think the Ohio State University is making this play right now. So we'll see how it goes. I think it gets back to something Mike just said about the sort of the purpose of education and what are we here for, right? So I think of the end or purpose of education as being education for virtue, which is an old-fashioned word, but really it's about equipping you for leadership in your family and your community and your country, right? That's essentially what that is. And so the question is, what are we using the technology for, right? So if the class is a class where you're actually called upon to produce research on something, and it would be helpful to draw from ChatGPT to collate, say a resource list or a lit review or something of that nature, I could see, documenting that, sharing that could be potentially part of it. But one of the things is that students almost don't understand, and what we've seen is that they don't understand they have to check the sources. They don't understand they actually have to check the sources because AI hallucinates. And even if you're using it for something that seems like a pretty black and white or cut and dry question, I mean, it has a sycophancy bias to it, which is the real, I think, problem with it. And so students don't know what they should check, right? They don't know if they should check, and is that a real journal that it's citing me to? How would I know that, right? So I think we're kind of in this unknown world. I would assume the models are going to improve. I hope they do. That gets me to, sort of the entrepreneurial side, which is we need students who can actually go out and build those models. But the question you're asking is about critical thinking, and I think there just is a pretty much an overblown reliance on AI without knowing even what questions to ask of it, and even knowing when to document use versus what. We don't even know how to cite AI at this point, right? Like, what does that even mean to cite AI, right? So I think we've got a real challenge on our hands, and I think it comes back to that question of purpose. And so, for a class, for instance, where I'd say, your goal is learning a language. Let's just take something as simple as that. I could see a use for AI, a tool being built or an LLM being built. I'm just going to use an example from my background. I'm a classicist, that was trained on all of Perseus's classical corpus of Plato, or all of the corpus of Aristotle, right? And it was built so that you could learn how to have a conversation with it in perfect Attic Greek, and you have actual Socratic dialogue with Socrates himself, and you improved your classical Greek and your ability to read Greek at the same time, so that when you walked into that classroom with the teacher, you could all sit around a table and have a conversation in ancient Greek about the text that was in front of you, right? So that is a humanistic use of AI, right? The purpose of it being so you can dive deeper into a topic faster than you could have before. It enables you to have that accelerated learning, right? That you couldn't have done on your own. But then in class, you're having a meaningful dialogue with people about a text that, has this enduring value, presumably, that we all want to learn. So I guess my question is always, for what purpose, right? So if you're using AI for discrete purposes where it's not going to be too much of an offload of your cognitive capacity, but rather enhance your cognitive capacity, I could see a purpose for it.
The offload versus enhancement argument was made back in, I don't know what, 1970s, when the scientific calculator was invented, a little bit earlier probably.
Yeah.
And the idea was that, well, this is the end of math as we know it. No, math and science has been more enhanced than they ever could have been.
We have seen that, although there is a paper that just came out by Barb Oakley and company that does point to an alarming reversal of the Flynn effect, which started the decline started in the 70s. And so I don't think we should be too glib about that. Although we have seen, I'm not against calculators or anything of that nature, but I do think AI is way more powerful than calculators. And so I do think that we should not be totally immune to sort of saying, well, this could theoretically happen. Just like, if you hired a personal trainer and the personal trainer was there to make you do the reps so that you could do the pull-ups, that's great. If the goal is to do 20 pull-ups, you could just pay the personal trainer to do the pull-ups, right? So, I think it's always a question of ends versus means, and what are we using it for? So,
yeah. That's a great analogy. Mike, we come to you next. What are your thoughts on AI and critical thinking?
I absolutely was going to think about the coaching idea, because that's what we need to emphasize. There's so many areas in which, we don't have apprenticeships per se. There's the trades are out there. The same shovel-ready jobs that Obama promised are still out there. Kids don't know that they can make six figures as a plumber. They don't realize, the amount of infrastructure work that we need. But kids do respond to coaching. And that's the one thing that AIs don't do well, which is, this is the experience of what it's like to feel the pain when you get knocked down in your karate class. And so you need to, bow to your sensei and understand that he's in it to help you learn something. You can watch videos forever with drones or, the special 4K effect of what it looks like from the top of the mountain. And you can read a book about the top of the mountain, but unless you have a Sherpa guiding you up that mountain and you experience it yourself, you're not going to have the real learning that it takes. And so we have to understand there's so much of us that we leave to the side because we think about, well, this is what a successful person needs to know. And then you leave this other kind of stuff alone. You don't know where your vegetables come from. You can't grow vegetables in your garden. And only the people who grew up on a farm know those things. But a school could teach those things as well. And again, it goes to fulfilling the whole person. And I cannot overstress what Ms. Valdez said about virtue. It is about virtue. It is about making you a better person, not just a know-it-all, not just a grunt, or what do you call the student who just grind, right?
Yeah.
You want to educate the whole person.
Yeah, appreciating the process of learning and not just the destination of being learned. That's a great point. Joe, what are your thoughts on AI and critical thinking?
Well, first of all, I'd like to put out that the if we continue down the road with AI, having a personal tutor, there's no reason really to have a university. I think universities have to make an argument for themselves about why they're still needed, along the lines I think that both Aaron and Mike were suggesting. And I like to give an example how I would make an argument to go beyond a personal tutor in terms of a university context. I would tell my students in anthropology, Introduction to Cultural Anthropology class, that these books that have all the knowledge about other cultures did not fall out of the sky. It was made, it was created. This knowledge is made. And in this class, you are going to make knowledge. So what I have them do is do a hypothesis. They go out in the world, they have to formulate questions, they have to go out into the real world, interview real people, get those responses back. And also they have to observe those people as well. And then they have to integrate both the survey responses and their observations and analyze it in terms of a term paper. So that is the real work of the classes, where they learn how to experience making knowledge. What they take the test on each chapter, it's online. They can get a perfect score by doing it up to 3 times. I just want them to read the material and get an answer so they engage with it. And I carry that forward into actually a classroom discussion. So that was me about 4 years ago. I don't know what I would do in terms of adopting AI it's part of that process. Perhaps in the thinking through of a hypothesis to test in the real world, that might be somewhere of a dialogue that the students might have, but they still would have to go out and actually ask questions and do those observations. To give you a quick example, one of my students hypothesized that people would more likely use doggy bags to pick up dog poop on the beach rather than in their neighborhood. Now, this might sound like, oh, this is a silly example, but if you're into sanitation and keeping the city clean, you would want to know that kind of what human behavior actually is. And so what he found is that there are little boxes that had freely available doggy bags out there on the beach, but they're not on every street corner in one's neighborhood. So that would be kind of an example of that, a learning, quote unquote, learning that the student could have. And there's everything about our behavior is subject to those kind of cultural, personal, and psychological analysis. And that's what I would like to engage them with, into understanding how anthropology works in other cultures, but also in our own culture as we observe ourselves. So I think that goes to what are we actually building in terms of the education, whether it's character or knowledge, or how do we make this thing? And that's part of that critical thinking process. It's not empty. It has to be filled with real world things, whether it's farming or observing people.
So you're seeing this as a possible way of every student being a knowledge creator, as opposed to what we've seen so far, which is generally a knowledge consumer, and show us what you've consumed and how much of it you've consumed and whether you've consumed it the right way. And you're potentially envisioning a future where students are creating knowledge, Joe?
Yeah, and it's easier to see if you have to go out on the farm and actually plant materials,
Yeah.
or go out and observe people. But if you're doing something like drawing, which you're using paper and pencil, say, in a classroom, it's harder for me to identify or see that process of making as visible or as tangible. But I know it's there. Also, I would want to say a quick comment about hallucinations. Yeah. Hallucinations are great if you're a fiction writer. Hallucinations are great if you're doing images. It's not good if you go to your doctor and he's hallucinating where your liver really is. Okay, so there's context in which hallucinations are perfectly fine.
Well, if hallucinations are addressed to the 95th or 99th percentile, would anyone's opinion on AI change? Because right now the hallucination rate is pretty high. Depending on how long of a
well, the scary thing about being a digital pack rat like I am because I have stuff that I wrote back in 2003.
Yeah.
And did I really believe that? Is I learned that I hallucinate about myself. I mean, nobody would play golf unless they hallucinated that they're a better golf player than they actually are. So you remember the good experiences and you kind of forget the bad ones. So that's a very human thing that has come up in our AIs. And so I guess the problem is that our expectation is that it is going to be this perfect computer thinking machine, and it's going to get rid of our error in our society. And it's never going to do that. And the more that we put it in that position, the more disappointed we're going to be. But the good news is that ultimately we will treat it like a tool, and universities will build their own LLMs, and universities will build their own image generation, and the things that we've been thinking about for a long time, at least in the computer science field, will get better. Not all at the same time, but ultimately, think about your grandfather's understanding of horses. That's completely lost. We don't know horse flesh. If I told my kids don't look a gift horse in the mouth, they don't even know what I'm talking about. But they also know that they don't look under the hoods of their cars. All right. Whereas somebody my age, I would definitely know, what a timing light is and how to use those kinds of things. So the LLMs will evolve, all the AIs will evolve. And I think the good news is that they will be evolved not just in this first rush, because right now what the pioneer models are doing is they're making them purposefully Disney friendly so that they can get a rapid adoption rate, and they can make it so any 12-year-old can use it. And then they'll say, well, look, we did this way faster than Google did, and that's why you should send us money. But over time, they're going to be smaller ones that can pay attention to smaller corpuses, like a medical corpus, for example, and say, all right, this is going to be more of an expert system. Like when Deep Blue beat Kasparov, back in the 80s, it was a team of the machine and chess players who were behind the scenes helping that machine do that. That was more of an expert system. And it did not have nearly as much data. I mean, every chess game that's ever recorded is a relatively small amount of data. So when we get them to that level, and then they're more personalized for us, just like my Yahoo was first in 1999, it's my LLM. And then I would like it to do things for me. Like, what was that song I used to love when I was 14 years old? Could you make a playlist of stuff like that? And I think we'll find all kinds of small educational things that PhDs wouldn't be interested in teaching us, but are nonetheless interesting and part of our journey to knowledge and appreciation of knowledge. So I would conclude with this section saying the artificial intelligence, the use of the machine is to get rid of scarcity. And academic attention is a scarce resource right now. So now that it's becoming plentiful, we have to make use of that abundance. And then, well, maybe that this kind of thing, maybe meta-analysis is not so something that PhDs have to do. Maybe we can just have automatic meta-analysis over this field, and that will help us all because we can present it to a wider audience.
Mike, you also mentioned that sort of outsourcing human abilities leads to an inability of that ability.
Absolutely.
And I'm reminded of a common example now is like Google Maps. I remember growing up, my dad would have the big map. We would go on car rides and try and do it for the camera, so the camera catches how big the maps are, and he's able to tell exactly where we are and exactly where we're going. And this was when I was just way in the back seat of our minivan there, because I had the coolest parents with the minivan. And once MapQuest was invented, my dad was like, oh, like people aren't going to be able to read maps anymore, and so on and so forth. And now today, even within the neighborhood that I live in, if I'm going to a place within my own zip code, I'm reliant on Google Maps. And so I had this conversation with my dad the other day, and my dad also said, I'm guilty of this as well, because my great grandpa didn't have maps. They just figured out based on the sun, based on the land, based on where it's setting. This is home. This is the shop. This is where we go get cows. So I certainly have no idea where to get cows. I barely know where to get steaks. And so Michael, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. And we're going off script here a little bit. Hopefully that's okay.
That's okay.
What are some of your thoughts? And I'll touch base with everyone here too. What do you think are examples of present day human abilities that will be inabilities? I don't want to call them disabilities. That's a different term altogether. Inabilities in the future.
I think this is kind of an economics question, and I think of it in my sense as a kind of work-life balance. So what are the things that I find to be recreational? And some of it is still intellectual curiosity. And so I said, well, what did I learn in school? But what are the things that I didn't learn in school? So I didn't learn anything about what I call a martial education. So I said, what is the purpose of my body? And what I ultimately did was I went through community emergency response training, and I went to, I learned the ISO protocols. I went to a Citizens Police Academy. So I started working with first responders about 10 years ago, and it taught me a whole bunch of different things that I never learned in school. And I got to relate to these people that I would literally trust with my life. I couldn't say that anything about people at work. So there are always skills that you can learn, when the lights go off. When the power goes off, where are my vulnerabilities? How can I be a bigger person than I am? When I just start thinking about, if I start beginning to believe that my body is what the Nike commercial says it is, then I'm losing touch with a set of realities that other people are ready to do. They're ready to sacrifice their time to, save someone out of a burning building. How do I learn how to do that? And it taught me a lot about things that I didn't know. And that was important to me to learn those things.
Interesting. Joe, we'll come to you next. What are some present day human abilities that you think might be inabilities in the future as a result of AI?
This is a puzzle. I recall that I used to use a slide rule in high school. I barely know what a slide rule is anymore. I went to a technical high school. I went to foundry, machine shop, sheet metal shop, print shop, carpentry. The one thing that I learned was that I don't want to learn a learning curve anymore. If there's something broken in my house, I'd rather call a tradesperson than use my skill to do that, because it will probably be a one-time thing. So I take this very personally in terms of, do I really need to do that? Now, who am I in the world? I'm one of 8 billion people who are learning things. I don't know what's going to happen. It's hard for me to project what kinds of skills will be encapsulated in other kinds of utilities. And it's going to be different throughout the world. There are a lot of inequities in the world. We live in a first world advanced society. I live in a suburb. I grew up in a housing project with no car. I had to learn the subways and the buses. Came out here. We had 5 cars in our family, one for each one of us. We had 3 children. So there's a lot of disconnects there in terms of how my lifestyle progresses and the particular context that I'm in. So it's really difficult for me to kind of project what AI will do. I mean, there are a lot of guesstimates, there are a lot of fears, there are a lot of expectations, but it's unclear how that's going to shake out. I'll leave it to Erin. She probably knows.
Yeah, Erin, I'll come to you in just a moment. We have a user comment that I just wanted to mention here from our friend Elizabeth, who says, the slide rule taught you a basic understanding of numbers, Those who trust calculators learn nothing about numbers. The panelists can all use their knowledge base to test the veracity of AI. Young people can't. Very interesting thought there. Aaron, we'll come to you to answer the question of what present day human abilities do you believe might be inabilities in the future as a result of AI?
Well, there's two things that I want to pick up on. First is something Mike said, and second, something Joe said, and I think they're somewhat related. So Mike mentioned how important it is to go out in the real world and solve problems, as did Joe, right? And creation of knowledge, right? My fear is that there is going to be a divide in the future over this question. So I could see a world in which students who may not have the same privileges that we do are sort of shunted off and given machine-based learning because it's cheaper, right? So for economic reasons, I could see some trade-offs being made in an industrial model school, right, in a public school. And that concerns me because I see on the K-12 side in my world is this huge rise of micro schools that were a response to COVID. It was parents reacting to virtual education, reacting to kids being in front of screens, reacting to them being isolated from their peers. And so their response to that was essentially a new version of homeschooling called microschooling, which has exploded in the past 5 years. There's over 1.5 million students being educated in that format, which is more students that are being educated in a Catholic school. So the growth curve is huge. So there is something in the parent demand side saying, I want a more personalized, more humanistic education for my child. Now those parents have the luxury and the ability to choose. Others don't. Right. And so my fear is that one divide in the future will be the critical thinking divide. It will come down to the ability of some people to be good at reading comprehension and other people not be good at reading comprehension. And we already see that. I think it drives a lot of our polarization, frankly, in our society. But I could see that getting worse and worse as more people become reliant on chatbots or video or other tools to supplement their lack of reading comprehension, and others being able to do that. And that's going to be one of those divides in the future that I think we're going to see some unexpected social consequences from.
Interesting. So those who, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but correct me if I'm wrong, but those who experience the process of learning may be better equipped for critical thinking than those who have shortcutted and skipped their way to the destination of being learned, and they haven't, gotten the bruises of those growing pains. Would you say that's accurate?
It's interesting that they pose that question because I think we're valuing one framework versus another framework. If I'm a person, I might enjoy my life, my purpose in life, being a plumber. So what? I don't need to know about speaking in Greek. So I think what Aaron said, the purpose of education, well, it's really very different in different parts of the world and even with the United States. And we're changing it because there are a lot of dissatisfaction now with the way universities educate, quote unquote, educate people. So people are making different kind of choices, like the micro school there. So I think this forces us to rethink what we consider as valuable education to have a happy life.
Do you mind if I jump in on that? Part of my research was on career and technical education in the past, and I could not agree with Mike more and you, Joe. The interesting thing to me is what jobs are vulnerable right now to AI, and plumbing is not one of them.
Right.
Okay. And I think that's what I mean when I say unexpected social consequences of all this, right? So my dad was an HVAC repairman, and he will tell me that it was very important for him to know some basic things about the way currents work and electricity so that he did not kill himself or those he worked with. And so this is an example of where having some knowledge that you can apply in real life as you are connecting wires or disconnecting wires is actually super important, and you wouldn't necessarily want outsourced right away. So to me, it's like it's about being in the real world, having that practical experience, having that practical coaching and that apprenticeship, which does form that knowledge base, which does form that critical thinking apparatus for that context, right? So I think critical thinking is important whether you're a plumber or a scholar. I think it matters either way.
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
I think you're right.
Oh no.
My slide rule says there's a 95% accuracy in that last statement.
And you don't even have to get up off your seat for that.
That's
You have that
amazing.
ready to go. Did you guys plan that or what?
No, it's right here by my desk.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Our viewers are going to think that we're all AI that had it. We all had that figured out. I didn't want to leave here without talking about the concept of privilege, because no matter what the society or economy is, there will likely be a group of haves and a group of have-nots. And one of our listeners, our viewers, Elizabeth, asks, what people and countries are going to be considered centers of knowledge if we have an AI blackout, which is certainly possible. So I believe we're in the circle, so we're at Joe now answering first. The question is, what people and what countries are going to be considered centers of knowledge if we have an AI blackout?
I once did a survey, looking at what were the benchmarks of an advanced society. And I think in the 1800s, it was the amount of sulfur dioxide that you were producing in your country, because I think it was tied to iron, making iron. That shifted, that metric in terms of an advanced society shifted over time to how big is your computer, how many megabytes or gigabytes does your computer have. And it still had the United States as number one because we had more computer power. Now, I don't know in terms of like AI, what you would measure your metric in terms of the most advanced society, but we still have this concept of advanced societies and those that are on the periphery that are not feeding in as much as they might. But AI has the opportunity to supersede or go beyond what the use of that technology is. It may not require, say, the industrial base, the way in which other previous iterations of a developed society had. So I think there's an opportunity there for reconfiguring what advanced and less advanced societies are. I haven't figured it out, but I think this presents an opportunity for doing more with that inequities across the world.
Interesting. Well, thank you for that, Joe. Aaron, what are your thoughts on who the haves and the have-nots would be in an AI blackout?
So taking that hypothetical, it made me think about the European Dark Ages. So if you look at history, we had this flourishing, civilization. It was cross continents. It was this knowledge sharing. There was all this knowledge generation happening. And then we get to what we call the Dark Ages, which was essentially a collapse, but it was also an informational collapse, right? So the scholars that had been sharing were no longer sharing, and knowledge was no longer being as shared and generated, right? And so where did civilization survive? Where were the readouts of civilization? Well, they were on the peripheries. They were in Ireland in these monasteries where people kept copying manuscripts just because they cared about them, right? So I would say if there is an AI blackout, which could, it could happen for all kinds of reasons, acts of war, who knows. It's in societies that are decentralized, where you have maximal numbers of communities of intention that I would say are most anti-fragile, say, to something like that, where you have not a one-size-fits-all kind of government-driven educational model, but one where there's multiple models and there's more likelihood that knowledge would survive in that context. So in that case, I'd say good old US of A.
Interesting thought. Okay. Mike, do you want to take that question as well? Who are the haves and the have-nots in an AI blackout?
I think what we've already done with the internet generation has both sides of that equation, the good and the bad and the ugly. On one hand, you have 54 nations in Africa who skipped the regular landlines and went straight to cell phones. So they got communications as a benefit. And then, of course, Skylink, I think it is. Is it Skynet or Starlink? Is going to give everybody internet access. But at the same time, you have people, young people, I think especially, who are only exposed to their market. So we think of young people as a market. We think of urban kids as a market. And their media companies are able to surround these people so that they think they're the most important people in the world. And everything that, the older people know is not valuable. So we do have that boom, boom, clack market and culture that follows from that, where they simply reject. I mean, I can remember in 94, 95, I was living in Brooklyn, and people said, we don't need the internet. We have hip hop. That's how we communicate. We don't need what those white folks are doing. And so there's always a possibility that, again, if you are entirely dependent on your digital communication, you could be in a little small world and not really understand what's going on the other side of the fence.
Interesting. Awesome. Thank you for commenting on that. I wanted to get some viewer and listener comments in here. Paul McCarthy says, so far, many students have not been taught to vet internet sources, critical thinking skills, not modeled and encouraged. Now with AI, I see a great many challenges ahead in education, but so glad you are discussing it. Wow, great input. Learning takes place in the field, outside educational institutions, and across vocational practices. So those are comments that have come in. Paul also has a question, but before his question, we have a question from Bella. And Bella asks, how can we use the human need for achievement and affiliation to our benefit in educational outcomes? I forget where we are in the round robin. I believe it's you, Erin.
I'm really glad she or he brought that up, because I've given a lot of thought to this quest for meaning thing.
Mhm.
And I want to come back to, humans choose to run marathons. We don't have to run marathons. We choose to run marathons. Okay. So as we get into a space where we've got the cognitive equivalent of a car, right? The AI can take us places. I foresee more affiliational and intentional communities being built up around intentional intellectual pursuits. For instance, I could see a club, essentially a country club, but it's for your mind. And in that country club, everybody agrees no digital devices. I'm going to turn off my Neuralink. I'm going to put away my phone, and we're going to sit there and we're going to read Dostoevsky together. And it will be a special place, just like when you go to the gym, you lift weights because they're there and you want to improve your body. You're doing that to improve your mind. So I could see a future in which those pursuits are intentionally out there and that people are going to opt into because they know their brain is going to get flabby if they don't do it, right? Just like we know the same thing happens to our body. So I think that would also drive some of the privilege distinctions as well. I do think that people who have more resources are going to be intentionally choosing those things versus people without, and that could drive some issues. But we all have that quest for meaning, and meaning is not achieved easily. In fact, if it's achieved easily, we call it a participation trophy. So humans are going to want something to quest for that takes some effort to do, that is not just presented to them in a few seconds on an AI chat. So I think that isn't going to go away. As a human being, we have to address that quest for meaning. And I do think that's where more intentional communities, that's where the university can perhaps rediscover its soul, perhaps, as saying we're one of those intentional communities.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Mike, how would you answer Bella's question? How can we use the human need for achievement and affiliation to our benefit in educational outcomes?
I think young people and middle-aged people as well all understand the value of coaches. So coaches, Sherpas, somebody who takes you through it, it says, this is what's going to happen to you as a person as you learn this. And I don't think there's a better example of that than online gaming communities. People form these, they form these cliques, their clan, and they play these games, and they like to win, and they help each other win. It's a perfect example of that kind of thing. And if AIs make that more prolific, if it lowers the cost of gaming, we can have new kinds of games than we've ever had before. And I think that area that a lot of young people are attending to is going to grow in interesting ways.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Joe. If you wouldn't mind also taking a stab at that question from Bella.
Sure. Meaning can be embedded in other things rather than, say, we think about education as such. How about military meaning? We are now watching the wonders of AI helping in the bombing going on over in the Middle East, both sides. So is that the quest for meaning that we have? Because some of our aspirations as humans is power dynamics rather than educational ones. Others kind of channel it into sexual pleasure or just pleasure hedonism. So we're channeling it in different ways. And I always go back to Carlos Castaneda and alternative realities, or where he's posing this, the way we understand reality, there are different channels to making it work, whether it's a power dynamic or pleasure dynamic or this meaning dynamic. So we can choose, like Aaron says, to channel it, but we're, as humans, we're channeling all sorts of different approaches to it, and they're not all nice.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for answering that question. One last question before we call it a panel. Mike, we'll start with you. And this is a question from Paul. How do we overcome teachers' resistance to learning, department chair people's resistance to changing curricula, school districts' fear of technology, of politicization, and of plurality itself?
I think there are enough universities in this country so that we know that we have a choice, and students will vote with their feet one way or another. I mean, if your professors aren't as attractive as even Mr. Beast or Versatarium or Smarter Every Day, people are going to learn when they're curious someplace else outside of the walls of the academy. So this is going to be supply and demand.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Joe, do you want to take that question as well?
You know, some students are still embedded in the concepts of microaggressions. You have to use the right pronouns, which we now know is unlawful to force a professor to use that. So there are kind of where students are is not all in terms of using AI. They're especially going through COVID, have been kind of short-circuited in terms of what we think is the normal developmental process. So, and I have a friend who's an instructor, and he's just totally resistant, no AI whatsoever there. So we're in a transition period, both in terms of students and faculty members. So I think our conversation is on the other side of that transition. And it's hopeful, but it has its elements. And then how do you work through that transitional period is up in the air.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Joe. Aaron, do you want to answer that question as well?
I mean, Mike took the words out of my mouth. I mean, the beauty of a decentralized system like what we have in the US, both choice on the K-12 side, which is increasing in every state, and on the higher ed side, we're going to find out which models parents, and they're the most important decision maker for kids under 18, and students want. So we're seeing parents making all kinds of choices right now, and they're essentially either saying, I'm all in on the AI side, I want AI enabled learning, and a lot of them are saying, absolutely not, that's not what we're doing here. And I don't think that's going to stop because we have culture wars over everything else. Why wouldn't we have a culture war over this, right? Like this is no different. And I do think that in coming years, the politics on the K-12 sort of district side are going to be fights over the use of AI in the classroom. And there are going to be just as strong divisions over this as there are over other contentious issues. And we need choice so that parents aren't forced into one model or another.
Yeah. Well, thank you to our panelists. We'll stop by each panelist for their final thoughts before we go. Joe, do you have any final thoughts for our viewers and listeners?
I think my brain has been fried by this conversation. I really enjoy using different models, and then I look at other fields and special uses, expert systems, and it's coming. We're standing in front of a fire hose, and it's just blasting at us. At least that's my perception, but a lot of my friends and others are saying, what is that? Can you please tell me a little bit more? Show me how that works on your cell phone. So being ahead of that curve, or being in the place where that curve is taking place, is really exciting and enjoyable. But a lot of folks just say, what are you doing with that, Joe? So that's kind of my thought in terms of that disconnect between what I enjoy doing, what I see what's happening, and what the rest of the world is kind of still pussyfooting around in terms of getting with the program.
Awesome. Erin, any final thoughts for our viewers and listeners?
Yeah, I think one thing, just is to tie all together what I'm hoping that I've conveyed here, is that I think the university essentially ceded a lot of its value because it became very credentialist. And so AI is just challenging the foundations of that right now. And so that is like, higher ed doesn't have much of a leg to stand on at this point. Okay, so this AI is actually an opportunity for institutions that choose to do so to reorient themselves around the true ends of education, which I take to be the cultivation of virtue. And by that, I've defined equipping you for virtuous leadership in your communities, right? So I don't think that has to always take place in a classroom. In fact, I think that hands-on learning is essential to this development of true leadership, and that can take place in the military, in an apprenticeship, or in a classroom. And I would just say that it's especially interesting as we develop teachers, and we're working on that here, that part of the core of their curriculum here is they have to be in a range of different classrooms so that they see this project of education as it really happens, because the worst thing in education is utopianism. And AI can easily fall into that utopian mindset where, oh, this is going to solve every problem. No, it's garbage in, garbage out, just like it's always been.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Mike, your final thoughts for our viewers and listeners?
Sure. Use AI, but don't forget your diet. Don't forget music. Don't forget to learn how to dance, to garden, to attend to the sick. These are things that you'll always want human beings to do, but you'll always want virtuous human beings to do it. So to double down on what Erin's saying, if your educational institution is not providing that, then there are other ways, there are other channels, and this is another channel. Don't treat AI like a search engine. Treat it like somebody who reads paragraphs and will do things. You can have a lot of influence on what the AIs tell you. So have a dialogue with them and try different ones so you can figure out, oh, I think that's Claude talking to me. Oh, I think that's Grok with that sense of humor talking to me. So experiment, learn, fulfill your destiny.
Awesome. Mike, Erin, Joe, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. I want to thank our panelists and, of course, our viewers and listeners for tuning in to our live stream, Reimagining the Academy, AI, Liberal Education, and the Future of Higher Learning. Thank you.